This is a spoiler review for Masters of the Universe Revelation Part 2. So if you haven't seen it and you don't want it spoiled, please check out my non-spoiler review where I give my overall thoughts on Part 2. So I was rewatching Part 2 last night, and the first part is really about the stages of grief, and Part 2 is really about parents and children. And the thing that really holds all the 10 episodes together is just that it's about these characters as a family. And that's so appropriate because that was kind of how they were defined and what made them unique in Filmation. And I love seeing that brought into a modern show that looks at it in a little more mature way, where, you know, your family members aren't always perfect and sometimes you get mad at them, but you always love them and you forgive them and you come back together. And it's just really great to see that. And, you know, part one really captured that adventure and exploration you saw in the Filmation series. And then part two really got more into the war and those epic over-the-top battles you got in 2002, and it was just so cool to have one series bring all of that together. And so what this review will focus on is kind of the things that really struck me in each episode, and most of this stuff is going to be things that were the first time in animation and things that we have been waiting for nearly 40 years as longtime fans. And so let's get started. So the first scene reveals that Man-at-Arms is Teela's father. For those of you who don't know, the Filmation cartoon back in the 80s established that Teela was the secret daughter of the sorceress, but never revealed the identity of the father. The 2002 cartoon actually teased that it may have been Man-at-Arms, but unfortunately it was canceled before they could ever reveal if that was true. And so to see this finally confirmed after all these years, there's always been something between Man-at-Arms and the sorceress. To finally see that confirmed in animation, it literally brought me to tears. I love this scene to death. Speaking of tears, this is the first time we've seen Sorceress die in the animation. It's been something that we've seen in the comics and was planned for the 2002 series. Here it's handled very well. Her sacrifice is meaningful. We get to know her character beforehand, and the scene is emotional and powerful, and it's just very well done. And I believe this is the first time we've seen Skeletor with the power of Grayskull in the animation. And the design for Skelegod I have kind of mixed feelings for, but it definitely grew on me, and I just love what they did with the character. The monologues about his cosmic awareness were just super well written, very poetic, and we get to find out what the power of Grayskull tastes like. And he's just oozes menace and power. I mean, I love the scene where he's turning everybody into these undead zombies and stuff. It's just amazing. I've never seen Skeletor this badass or this menacing. I kind of wish we could have got a little bit more out of Skelegod, but what they move on to with the character is just as interesting, and obviously they had limited time to deal with all of this. Speaking of first, we got Clamp Champ in the animation. This is a character from the original 80s toy line. He was the only black character in the entire line, and we have wanted to see him in animation for decades. And so when we finally see him, he has evacuated the king and queen himself, which means that he probably has a very high rank. Perhaps he's Man-at-Arms, perhaps he is the king's personal guard. He actually has had both of those positions in various different versions of his story. The scene he is in is excellent. It is a very memorable, very powerful scene, but unfortunately he dies at the end and they do not bring him back, and I feel like this is a huge wasted opportunity. I understand why they chose to do this with named characters. It makes the scene more real and more powerful and lets you know no one is safe. But I feel like they should have chosen someone other than Clamp Champ, maybe Mekaneck or somebody like that. But I feel like this was just a real wasted opportunity to kill him off this quickly and not bring him back. And so episode 2 gives us Savage He-Man, and I kind of scratched my head when I first heard about this, but boy, watching the episode, I love Savage He-Man. I love this episode. It's just so much fun to see this character who's normally so restrained and so heroic just let loose and just be so primal and so savage and have such raw, over-the-top power. This is my absolute favorite fight scene in the entire series. And just a nice little touch is that this is the first time I believe we've seen He-Man use an axe in the animation. Obviously, one comes with his figure, but for whatever reason, he's just never used that as a weapon in a cartoon. Another interesting thing is that Skeletor refers to himself as the interdimensional demon. This is a reference to his very first origin, where he was actually from another dimension. And this is actually his origin for Revelation. If you want details on that, go pick up the Revelation comic. Issue 2 goes into detail on his origin and how he joined the evil Horde and became Hordak's apprentice before eventually betraying him. The comic also reveals his secret true motivation for originally wanting the power of Grayskull. Now, this doesn't come up with the animation, but there's a reason for that, of course, is that regardless of his intention going in, once he gets that power, it just puts his id in the driver's seat and he becomes absolutely obsessed with He-Man, and whatever he wanted to do doesn't get done. And this is also the first time we've ever seen Point Dread in the animation. Point Dread, of course, comes with the Talon Fighter in the original toy line. And here it has been reimagined as something bigger and more epic. And I love it. It is very much in the tradition of the playsets being reimagined in the animation. And I love the fact that it's protected from Skeletor finding it by the power of Grayskull, kind of implying maybe it was an outpost of Grayskull at some point. And one little touch I wanted to point out, when we're in the Sorceress's bedroom at the end of the episode, we see a rug, and of course that is the rug that is over the trapdoor in the Castle Grayskull playset. And this is in what is traditionally known as the throne room of Grayskull, though a lot of fans would consider that the Sorceress's room, and it's located on the second floor of the playset right behind the eyes of Grayskull. And sure enough, in the animation, that is the exact location of the Sorceress's bedroom. I just thought that was a neat touch. Episode 3 really revolves around Evil-Lyn, so let's talk about her character. So the origin we see to her is expanded upon in the comic book. That's going to be issue 3 of the Revelations comic, and it's really excellent. You don't need to read it, but it'll give you much more insight into where she comes from. One thing to note, that the parents that she refers to in the flashback are not her biological parents, and we don't know who her birth parents actually are. I think this is a good origin for her, reimagining Zalatia as some slums. It creates a very human, very relatable origin for Evil-Lyn, and we kind of understand her character and sympathize with it. And this is an Evil-Lyn that has considered betraying Skeletor, but hasn't done it yet, at least not openly. And so that makes sense, because obviously Skeletor wouldn't have a lot of tolerance for stuff like that, would probably either kill her or exile her, as we saw in various other incarnations. And of course, Skeletor and Evil-Lyn have always been portrayed as being in an abusive relationship, whether that be professional or intimate, depending on the portrayal of these two characters. And so the analogy that they kept using of Skeletor being a parasite feeding off of Evil-Lyn is just so perfect. If you know anything about abusive relationships, that is just the most perfect analogy. It's just so well written. There's a great scene where she refers to Skeletor as a virus and tells him, "I will play host to you no more." And so the sorceress outfit she wears turns out to be essentially Skeletor branding her as his. The bat is, of course, a symbol he wears across his chest, and of course it's the same color scheme, and this is basically turning her into something that's like, "I own you, you are my sorceress." And so when she seizes the power and transforms, she is both literally and figuratively claiming her own power. And so I predicted that she would pull an Infinity Gauntlet and basically do what Nebula did in the comic book and just sneak up and take the power when Skeletor wasn't paying attention. And that's exactly to the T what happened. And so another thing I predicted would happen and was hoping would happen is that she would succeed in betraying Skeletor to the point where she would overthrow him and become the main villain for a little bit, because we've never seen her actually do that in 40 years of trying, and we got it this time. And I love her outfit as God Lynn. There's something about it that has a very 80s feel to it. It looks like a type of villain that Christopher Reeve's Superman or Arnold Schwarzenegger Conan would fight, or what Meg Foster Evil Lynn would have looked like if she got the power of Grayskull in the 80s movie. I just really like it. But before my MVP on the villains, I gotta say I love Beastman. Oh man, this just so took me by surprise that he was the one guy in Evil Lynn's corner, and I just loved him to death. And it made total sense, right? Skeletor is super abusive. A guy like Beastman is gonna wanna find a leader who is not as abusive and toxic as Skeletor, and it just broke my heart to see Lynn corrupted by that power, and to see, that disappointment in Beastman when he was like, "You sound just like him." It just broke my heart. This is the great thing about developing your villains. You start rooting for them too. So in episode 4, Adam and Skeletor team up. So this is the longest I think we've seen Adam without the power in the animation. And this is the most badass I've ever seen this character. And I've never been a big fan of He-Man having to transform, and the existence of Adam, but this totally sold me on the character. He's essentially Captain America, and just like there are stories where Steve Rogers loses the super soldier serum and still kicks ass, same thing here with Adam, because he is He-Man. And it's just really cool for him to team up with Skeletor, because obviously there have always been third-party villains throughout the history of the franchise that He-Man will have to fight other than Skeletor. And it's not unusual for He-Man and Skeletor to team up against said villains, but I don't think I've ever seen Adam and Skeletor team up. And it was just super, super epic. I mean, it's Adam and Skeletor in the throne room of Grayskull against God Lynn. There is no part of that sentence that is not amazing. And it was just so cool to see these two old rivals who know each other's moves inside and out play off of each other during the battle. So we get a great lineup of henchmen who get to fight Teela and Andra in this episode. And unfortunately, they don't get much screen time, but what they do is pretty satisfying. And we even get 2 new henchmen that we haven't seen in animation before. Goatman, who is from an old storybook, and Pig Boy, who is from the Masters of the Universe movie. There was a contest in the 80s to be in the Masters of the Universe movie, and so this kid won, and they put him in a costume and had him hand Skeletor his staff, and that's who Pig Boy is. And then, as a surprise that wasn't in the trailer, we got Blade, who is also from the Masters of the Universe movie. First time in animation, I was floored. And so at the end of the episode, we get the army of Eternians, and I was a little disappointed by this. So we end up getting Stratos' people, the Avions. We get Buzz-Off's Bee people. We get some villagers, and then we get the fish people that we saw Merman leading, but for some reason no Merman, which is completely mystifying. But that's it, and if you've watched the previous animated series, as you know, there's a lot more races and a lot more peoples of Eternia than this. But what I will say is that it is a big battle, and we don't see all of it. We can't see every single person in it. So hopefully whatever species you think is missing here is somewhere on that battlefield fighting the good fight. The beginning of episode 5 gives us the return of Orko, and as I predicted, he is in Trawlin God mode with a brand new costume I absolutely love to death. And I love this appearance, and I love the fact that he goes toe-to-toe with God Lynn, and he is the one that gets the power sword from her. Just like Filmation, Orko saves the day constantly. Love it to death. And of course, my man Scareglow is back too with his army of Shadow Beasts. Unfortunately, Scareglow doesn't get to do a whole lot here. He doesn't get to do anything cool or interesting before Orko shows up and turns him into his own personal punching bag. But I still love the fact that Orko did get to whoop Scareglow's butt. Speaking of characters that got shortchanged, we're in the world of Fisto and Clampchamp. If opening the gate to the world of the dead returned Orko, we're in the world of Fisto and Clampchamp. We were told they were sent to Subternia. I don't understand why they're not there. I hope this is addressed in the writer's commentary. And then there's the appearance of Ram Man. I love his design, and he has the bulk he had in 2002, but he also has those spring legs from Filmation, which here are shown as being cybernetic, like he's got artificial legs. I love the design, but unfortunately the character seems a little wasted here. The scene is just really weird and jokey. It just doesn't fit with the rest of the battle that's going on. And Ram Man doesn't even get to ram anything. It's just a weird cameo. Ileena was also not in there. She's a character from Filmation that was originally supposed to be in part 1 in episode 2, but her scene got cut. They did record the voice of Kevin Smith's daughter, Harley Quinn Smith, for that role, but unfortunately it probably just never got to animation, and they just decided not to put the character in part 2, so that kind of sucks. And Teela finally gets to become the sorceress. And so after all this time, we finally see the pool of power. This is the concept from Filmation. This is where the sorceress gets her power. Now, we never actually saw it in Filmation, and so this way exceeds anything my imagination could have conjured for what it looked like. It's actually called the Tide of Transformation here, but I'm just glad they kept the idea of the sorceress going into water to get her powers, because it's symbolic of rebirth, and honestly it's evocative of baptism, which is being reborn in God, which is the absolute perfect analogy for what is happening when you become the sorceress. And I love Teela as the sorceress. She gets to go outside the castle, she gets to kick ass, and she is still Teela. She's still the same character she's always been, and I love it. I love the outfit. It is a combination of her mother's outfit and her traditional outfit, and it just looks so good. I love it to death, and I love the fact that she gets to fight Evil-Lyn for the first time ever on equal footing, because she's always been a warrior. Evil-Lyn has always been a sorceress, and so it's always been asymmetrical warfare between these two rivals, and to see them go toe-to-toe for the first time as equals is freaking amazing. And the epilogue. So there was also another Evil-Lyn story we've never got to see, which was her turning good. And that's what we saw at the end. She ends up going to Trala at the end. And I just love it. I don't know if I should call her Good Lyn or Chaotic Neutral Lyn, but it's a very appropriate ending for her character. We see Andra become Man-at-Arms, which is a very natural progression for her character. Absolutely perfect. Love it. And after all these decades, we finally, in animation, see Teela and Adam not really confess, but at least admit their love for each other, right? Now, we don't get a kiss, but my God, they are blushing just at the fact that they're admitting they like each other. It's so adorable. And honestly, it's probably a realistic way for it to go. I don't know about you, but the first time I admit I like someone, I'm probably not kissing them. We're probably building up to that, so that's fine. And then, of course, there is the final scene. We go back to Triclops' tech cult. We get to see what Motherboard looks like. I did say I wanted that statue to come to life, and this far exceeds my imagination on that. I love the design for Motherboard. And then, of course, what does Motherboard rhyme with? Evil Horde. Now, I saw this one coming. So, in the Classics bio, there is a reference to a techno-organic virus that can turn people into cyborgs, and I kind of suspected that was what this was with Triclops' cult. And so in the Classics bios, that comes from the Horde, so I suspected that connection. I'm a huge fan of the Evil Horde, but I'm not going to get into speculation for season 2. I really want to wait and see if Kevin Smith does writer's commentaries for the episodes like he did with part 1, and then come back and give my speculation, because I'm hoping they give some hints at what they might do in season 2. I'm super looking forward to it if we get a season 2. That is based on viewership. If we get enough viewers, Netflix will do a season 2, and I'm super hoping we get one. And so those are the biggest things that jumped out at me. Obviously, I'm a big fan of this stuff. I could talk for hours and hours, but I'm not going to. I will come back and definitely do a video if we get writers' commentaries, and just do a video on that. But man, I'm just super glad that we got this, and super hoping for season 2, guys. All right, like and subscribe for more videos. And until next time, let the power return.